I'm going to give a talk some of you may have heard already. Well, it will be a bit slightly different, but not so different from the talk I gave at the Micro-phenomenological workshop last May. So feel free to, well, not to listen if you already heard it. Well, it's a bit slightly different, but not so much different. So I will start reading the talk right now. The time we lived during the 3 months of the lockdown between last March and May was qualified by many and in the press as amazing, strange, bewildering. Indeed, this period has been so new, so surprising, that it has often left us wordless. Personally, apart from a few newspaper articles relating to the inconsistency in the management of this health crisis by the Macron French government, I was not able to write anything then about what was still for me in the process of unfolding. So in this presentation, I would like to offer 2 short moments of reflection about this so strange time. First, how the lockdown period self-generated a different relation to time. And second, how this regained time, in the Proustian sense of the word, did not happen for me to be a meditating or praying time, but rather impose itself on me as an extremely fragile time, and how this general weakening emerged. For each moment, I will offer a small micro-phenomenological self-explicitation where I have sought to anchor these intuitions by returning to a few source moments I lived during this time. It is not meaningless that the health crisis we are still going through has direct ecological groundings and implications, insofar as the emergence of new viruses and diseases is probably narrowly linked to the general modification of the ecosystems all over the world. In this respect, I use here the word ecology in its primary sense, as it is well identified in the prefix eco. In Greek, tracing back to Aristoteles in his Politics, ekos designates the house in the sense of the home, the center, the nourishing living place, where one is oneself and entre soi, between ourselves, unexposed to the eyes of others, of strangers, in short, where we live, where we inhabit, or kill. Concretely, while being locked down at home, I experienced this regained place of the home of ecos, and it is this matrix sense of political ecology, more and before its contemporary sense of a committed discourse for the environment or nature, that I will have in mind in what follows. Even if, of course, the lived rediscovered experience of this inner house results as a kind of lever, prime lever, of a rediscovery of the environment, of nature, and of all the other living beings, and also of a heightened awareness of the climate emergency and of the possible apocalypse, or certain kind of apocalypse of our world, of our current world at least, as for example, Michael Fossel shows quite well in his 2012 book, Critique de la raison apocalyptique. So first, the time regained as a downtime without schedule. As lockdown imposed itself on us, a number of my friends told me how it really did not change much for them, how it was even an opportunity to refocus more on themselves, to better get in touch with themselves, even to no longer endure the gaze of others or to be exposed to their judgment. After the initial moments of bewilderment and realization that the lockdown was going to cause severe change in our ways of life, as we carry on experiencing right now, many of us have indeed rediscovered as well a different time, experienced its new quality, more loose time, unstructured, a time regained, again in this very fine Proustian sense, a time without time, that is to say, without appointments, with no or very less commitments, save those I propose to myself. For me, at some point, this time received a name. It called itself, actually, Jouvernay. Jouvernay is the village in the Alps near Lehman Lake, where I go each summer. It's my family ancestral place. It's a place where I have spent every summer and winter holiday since I was a child. It's also a place where I find myself again, where which makes me enter into myself anew each time I visit. It's a place where I would say I make solitude, a place which is deeply evoked also by this very beautiful word vacation, which also echoes the words emptiness and void. So here is a first micro sequence of self-interview, which I invite you to go into with me. More precisely, my small instruction to you would be just to check while you are listening to my small narration, whether you resonate with what I lived or observed along my different feelings, bodily experiences, or not. So, at a particular point during this time, this lockdown time, the word Jouvernay crystallized the intense emotional flavor of a time regained. The general condition for the emergence of this word in my consciousness was undoubtedly, as I said, my immersion into a leisurely time without deadlines. This was the taste of an atmosphere quite different from the one my Paris apartment usually evoked. But there was more. The constraint to no longer move, to stop going outside. This is actually also what I experience each summer at Jouvernay, my perimeter being limited by having use only of a bicycle. These were actually the general conditions of emergence of the word in my consciousness. So I will now evoke the very moment of its appearance. I am sitting at the window in the living room, the only place in the apartment where the sun shines through the window. It is early in the afternoon. I am surrounded by my interior garden, an olive tree, some aromatic plants and flowers. We had lunch with my daughter. I hold a coffee cup in my left hand. And without doubt, I have recreated without knowing it, the concrete conditions, the afternoon, the sun, the seat, a small garden of Jouvernay. But I don't know it at that moment. I hold in my right hand Simone de Beauvoir's book, La Vieillesse, which she wrote in 1970. And I feel I'm literally tasting this moment. Little noise in the street, voices in the distance, no cars. The street is extraordinarily empty. I take a few sips of hot coffee. I feel the heat of the sun on my skin. I feel myself breathing more deeply, opening my rib cage as if to fill me with air. My chest broadens. I get inside the atmosphere of this moment. Then there is the diffuse taste of a familiar atmosphere. I close my eyes and I visualize the stairs of my house in Jouvernay, the warmth of the stone, the cherry tree opposite in the garden, the sounds of magpies and sparrows in the tree, and I hear myself saying internally, Jouvernay. Later, I will write a small text to a friend on my phone, on my iPhone. You see, I can't go to Jouvernay, so Jouvernay came to me. And with this arrival of this word in my consciousness, my whole bodily and emotional archaic anchorage that was lived implicitly, probably, becomes conscious. So, like many of us, probably, I experienced this slowing down of time deeply, to the point of telling myself every day, as the fateful unlockdown dates of 11th May in France approached, that I would carry on and make an inner choice of this previously external constraint. Stay at home would become the inner barometer of my daily life. And in this way, I would get rid of the hustle and bustle that makes up our urbanized lives. But despite many incentives, both from a small voice within myself and from friends who regularly invited me to participate in meditation, yoga, prayer sessions via audio or video, I didn't take advantage of this new regained time to meditate or pray more or better. I must say I even experienced a kind of desert or void or a kind of meditative or liturgical poverty. Did I become unspiritual? There is actually, I would say, a curious paradox here. At the moment when time is offered to us a hundredfold, the taste for meditation vanishes. While praying or meditating are often neglected on the grounds that I don't have time. Now, when there is plenty of time, or there was plenty of time at that moment, the desire for what was essential for me receded. And during a phone call with a friend, I even named this as a need maybe for liturgical asceticism. So if I try, as I tried then, to make sense of this feeling, which is bordering on the absurd, what I sense actually is the emergence of an inner movement of weakening or fragilisation, which I would like to try now to unfold a little bit more. So the experience of fragility or frailty. This feeling of futility, of absurdity, probably responds to the absolute distress of the situation we lived during the lockdown period, and we're still living right now, which we also know has probably no reason not to last for a long time. And this is what generated in me this diffuse feeling of an unprecedented fragility. This has been written a lot in the media. This unknown virus confronts us with the essential fragility of our humanity. In moments of mourning, of violent death, of loss of a beloved one, we are confronted with an intense feeling of this total weakening of our being. Each time it is a fleeting or even a lasting ordeal which settles for a time within me before receding into the background of my consciousness, which is soon occupied again by everyday life and interests. But with the arising of this unknown virus, this weakening of my being was increased tenfold, except that it applied to myself directly and not to a fragility of my being experienced by proxy in connection with the loss of others. So thinking about that, this feeling of embrittlement, of weakening, of general weakening, of course, took place in a social, political, and existential context, which is possible to decline, to define through at least three dimensions. First, it is the social and collective time of these very particular moments, these first 2 weeks of lockdown in France from mid to end of March. And these 2 weeks reverberated within me in a prevailing existential mood of dull anguish, of being contaminated without knowing it, and of life suspended, waiting each morning for the emergence of possible symptoms. So we all experienced these first 2 weeks of great uncertainty. And that's quite characteristic, I would say, of this deep fragility or weakening. Second, this basic anxiety reactivated each morning with the phrase, "no fever," was intensified by the feeling of insecurity, the general feeling of insecurity caused in France, but I think in many other countries as well, by the quite incoherent political management of this health crisis. And it triggered a feeling of not being at all reassured or supported as individuals by a clear state discourse and strategy. So it generated a feeling of abandonment, of increased instability. And third, there was as well the ambivalence of my own relationship to death, both confrontation and denial. And this ambivalent feeling was as well intensified during this health crisis, I would say, by the obscene combination of the counting of the deaths every evening in the media, with combination of this with the political refusal of any support for the dying and their relatives, of great isolation of the people who were dying at the hospitals. So in fact, this existential feeling of extreme fragility that I described here in these different features on the basis of its social political context was also anchored for me in a specific moment to which I would like to come back now, thanks to another small moment of self-explicitation interview. So I named this moment waking up or awakening, because it is both a bodily waking up and an inner awakening. And I would like to invite you to experience this second sequence of self-interview with me, again, while checking, like during the first moment, to what extent you resonate or not with it. It is Monday morning. It is the first Monday of March 2020. 2020, so last year, well, this year. We are not in lockdown yet in France. I wake up and I feel something different inside me. Because the last week I have been buried in my bed with high fever, exhausting dry cough, feeling of extreme difficulty in breathing. And every morning during this last week, I watch in myself for the worsening respiratory signal that would mean go to the hospital now, or for a feeling of improvement, a sign of remission. But every morning I make the same diagnosis, same feverish state, same respiratory congestion. I feel it could be coronavirus. However, I deny it and I wait, watching for signs. My body is fighting it, I feel it. Rising fever as the day progresses, collapse in the evening. But as I wake up in the morning of March 2, so after more than a week, something has changed in my body. I get up, I inspect myself, and suddenly I understand the fever has subsided. I walk in my apartment, I check my inner state. My head is lighter, my forehead cleared. I feel my eyes more open, and suddenly also I feel my rib cage, which opens, a kind of childish pleasure of playing at inhale, exhale, and ease on maybe even a kind of jubilation simply to breathe. I feel quite simply more alive, whilst at the same time infinitely more fragile. And the tension of the struggle in body and mind against what has rightly been called at that moment the invisible enemy now meets a relaxation which results in emotional relief and a huge need to breathe, literally to exhale, as after a traumatic shock, to fill your lungs to the bottom, to experience the breath there, inhale, exhale, check that you are still alive. So this feeling of amplified breathing, where the lungs swell and empty, in another context and with other words, I would say the French writer Maurice Blanchot vividly bears witness to it at the end of his small book testimony, L'instant de ma mort, he wrote in 1944, which magnificently echoes this infinite reopening of life within possible death. Here, in this case, of death in life, but in a sense, it's all one. So let me quote him just a little bit. It's right at the end of the book, which is a very small essay anyway. The one the Germans were already targeting, waiting only for the final order, then felt an extraordinary feeling of lightness, a kind of bliss. Nothing happy though. Sovereign joy, the meeting of death and death. Henceforth, he was linked to death by a surreptitious friendship. Then, undoubtedly, began for the young man the torment of injustice. However, at the time when the shooting was just waiting, there remained a feeling of lightness that I could not translate. Freed from life, the infinite that opens, neither happiness nor misfortune, neither the absence of fear, and perhaps already the step beyond. I imagine that this ineffable feeling changed what remained from existence, as if death outside of him could only collide with death within him. I am alive. No, you're dead. So this testimony, of course, is a radical one, and it's really the moment where this young man could have been shot and was not finally. So he described really this small moment where he thought he would be dead, and finally he's not. I will speak here of fragility. We may have other words to name this feeling of absolute distress, of immersion in a situation where the unpredictable disorients all control. You may prefer to speak of vulnerability, precariousness, or even submission. And in all these terms, of course, resonates something of our extreme passivity, of our completely being affected, of a form of undergoing. I personally prefer the term fragility because it reflects, to my view, a more fundamentally friable nature of my being. Fragilis in Latin is that can be broken, as for example, the contemporary philosopher Jean-Louis Chrétien so rightly pointed out in his last book, precisely called Fragilité. It also indicates what is fiable, as the philosopher Paul Ricoeur also mentions, the one who has also become aware of one's own weak spot, where there is in turn an active resumption of this passive inclination. So I prefer to speak of fragility because this experience seems to me more universal, at least in comparison with the contemporary use of the other words I mentioned, which name this extreme passivity, but also designates social or political categories of people. For example, vulnerable people, in Levinas's case, Emmanuel Levinas's case, are designate primarily the widow, the orphan, so special categories of persons, or today, vulnerable people in the ethics and in the law designate the elderly or people with chronic illnesses. As far as precarious people, they are, for example, in Hans Jonas's words, primarily the living beings more exposed to the risk of death for him, namely plants and animals, or in a more recent political and social context, people who live under the poverty line, or the ones whose occupation exposed to hunger. As far as submissive people, there are typically also special categories of people in the social political discourse, for example, slaves, or in Simone de Beauvoir's second sex, women themselves. So that's the reason why I prefer the word fragility, because it seems to me more encompassing than these other words. And in this context of absolute weakening and embrittlement of our being, even the usually operative supports of meditation or prayer at that moment became meaningless for me. As if there were still artifacts, sorts of formatted windows of time dedicated to finding oneself, predetermined for my well-being. And it is, for example, the very acute diagnosis of the sociologist Frédéric Lordon, who analyzes the ambiguous goal of mindfulness meditation sessions offered to employees in companies. So a pre-formatted time, supposedly of return to oneself, ultimately intended to make productivity at work even more profitable. So hence the ambiguity, of course, of this kind of sessions. And the question we could ask would be, isn't this new so-called cognitive capitalism, which is Frédéric Lordon's expression, isn't it even more insidiously manipulative than the one Karl Marx denounced in the 19th century? So this current pandemic situation generates distress, such that, maybe so radical distress, such that it even maybe renders these dedicated moments for meditation or prayer ineffectual, maybe even obscene, insofar as they are abstractly cut off from the continuous daily rhythm, which is actually suffers with anxiety, worry, insecurity, and instability. So these moments, these meditation session moments, cut off from the reality of our insecurity and instability, daily instability, separated from this very reality. Even though maybe they might be framed into a pre-meditation and post-meditation session, we could ask ourselves if they do not reproduce in another way a kind of abstraction or disconnection which haunts our lives and our societies today, which are always on the brink of dissociation, of disconnection, even though we're hyper-connected at the very moment where we are all together, of some kinds of, as a metaphor, but also as a very acute meaning of this metaphor of schizophrenic dissociation. As for example, Gilles Deleuze very early in the 70s described it in his Anti-Oedipe book, describing how schizophrenia is produced by this kind of capitalistic way of living. Hence, this acute feeling of absurdity with regard to these tools, insufficiently powerful here to bring about any genuine reconnection, any true embodiment of my distressed self. What is left? What was left then? Maybe only this emergency of a kind of asceticism, as I said, with regard to this, precisely to this pre-formatted liturgy or to this technique offered to our biotech minds, or maybe a kind of emergency of a deeper epoche, to use Husserl's words, a suspension, a break of our preconceptions. It seems that the answer comes from a deeper place, freeing oneself from predetermined formats, from appointed moments, also from their caricature, from digital sessions of guided meditations, from liturgies via Zoom. So freeing oneself also from that. And in a sense, the answer that comes is a face-to-face encounter with this distressed self, and also the absurdity of our situation, and which is quite well captured in these words pronounced by a Russian Orthodox monk, Saint-Silouan, who said in his different books, "Hold your spirit in hell and do not despair." So what makes me then more alive in this hellish apocalyptic situation? Maybe more living, as I chose to formulate it in the title of this presentation, rather than more alive, as we would commonly say. Living, because this present participle indicates a process the process of living, and not a state or a being as alive would. To be alive would be only to survive, in a sense. So how can we not be mere survivors who anxiously await the signs of our imminent possible death, separated from ourselves, external to oneself, separated from our beloved ones in case we're at the hospital, isolated and lonely? How can we be living, in a sense, again, and possibly from within? So these micro moments that I named Jouvernet and waking up, awakening, these two moments I just very quickly described, express for me this uncontrolled influx of life into me, and also emanating from my respiratory dynamics, which unceasingly connect and regenerate the internal and the external. So this feeling of becoming more living, in a sense, I experienced it more viscerally in the very cardiac rhythm, and also emotionally as a very urgent feeling of reliving or emotional, affective reliving. And in these micro moments, when my rib cage suddenly took the air fully into my lungs, swelled spontaneously with the influx of air in a kind of non-dual move, internal, external, passive, active, receptive. When I feel this increased flow of air into my lungs, so it's a very basic and very implicit and archaic experience, breathe in, breathe out, which is also very close to the involuntary breathing of the newborn. So by opening myself to the air flowing in me, I literally expose myself. I risk my life because in our present situation, also very concretely, I could at any moment inhale the virus. You know, these famous droplets which remain in the air. So we already absolutely don't know what happens when you inhale very concretely. It's very risky in a sense, each time you inhale, you know. But more generally, by risking my life, in a sense, I win it back, and I pass from the status of survivor to that of living. I am more alive at the heart of this risk I choose to take. In that very small experience, it is interesting to account for a testimony which is given by Simone de Beauvoir, who magnificently expressed this tension, this very tension of living and risking, and living more deeply while you take a risk. And she accounts for this tension with the example of Stendhal's heroine, the writer Stendhal, French writer Stendhal's heroines, who lived by opening up to the unpredictable, the unforeseeable, the surprising dimension of reality. So I will allow me a very small quotation, and I'm quite at the end of my paper. It challenges, so I'm quoting Simone de Beauvoir at the end of the first volume of The Second Sex. It challenges the very meaning of life, that of each and everyone. A passionate and profound woman constantly revises the established values. She knows the constant tension of freedom without support. In this way, she constantly feels in danger. She can at any moment win everything, literally inhaling, or lose everything. it is this risk assumed in the anxiety that gives history the colors of a heroic adventures. So it's very daily as well. It's heroic, but very daily. And the stake is the highest, the very meaning of this existence, which is the possession of each one, her only possession. Mina de Wangel, so this is one of the heroine in standard novels, Mina de Wangel's adventure may in some sense seem absurd, but it involves an ethics. Quotation end. So becoming more living in time of pandemic is in this sense as well, assuming one's fragility at the heart of the risk we take each time we inhale. This fragility being also one's own inner weak and tender spot. Risking exposing one's identity and integrity. In different fields, there has been many researches done, for example, in immunology, in psychology, or in politics, which clearly show that this, what we could call a kind of safe normativity or hyper security, is also what is fatal. It is very well described and analyzed, for example, in Ulrich Beck's theory of risk, which is already a bit early, but still very actual. By exposing ourselves, in a sense, you immunize yourself. By transgressing, you discover yourself. By engaging, you provoke transformations. And by doing all this, you no doubt contribute, even modestly, maybe to changing a part of this current world we live in, and also other people maybe around us. I thank you for your attention.